Right now you're on Bush Telegraph. Cameron Wilson with you. David Attenborough describes my next guest as the best ornithological illustrator alive. These days it's fairly rare for Bill Cooper to venture too far from his home in the Queensland rainforest, but he has today to mark the release of his biography, An Eye for Nature, The Life and Art of William T. Cooper. It's written by Penny Olsen, and Penny and Bill join me now. Hi to both of you. Thanks for coming in.
Hello, Cameron.
Bill, it's your childhood, reading about your childhood in this book. It sounds idyllic, barefoot, roaming the bush. What was it like?
I reckon it was idyllic. I wouldn't have had it any other way. It was very enjoyable. I think kids that lived in the city were deprived.
It doesn't seem like your parents were too worried about you. You're off catching snakes and swinging through fires and all sorts.
Yes, it's. I often think about that now and think if I was a parent, I would have been worried. But I'm sure they worried in their way. But they just trusted in our knowledge of the bush and that we were comfortable in what we did.
We're talking about an area just outside of Newcastle in New South Wales. What was the landscape actually like?
Well, it was sort of eucalypt woodland mostly where I lived, and it was uphill and down dale, but it had deteriorated a bit by fire, but mostly. Oh, and there was a patch of nice rainforest within this area.
And what type of wildlife were you coming across?
Oh, well, we had, in the backyard, we had gliders gliding from one tree to another, frogmouths and butcherbirds and lots and lots of different birds in the backyard. And a 3-mile walk, which we often did as kids. We'd wander over to the Glenrock Lagoon where there was an escarpment and a nice little patch of rainforest where there were regent bowerbirds, and that was a great attraction. Mm-hmm.
So you had this love of wildlife and love of birds from a very early age. How do you think that upbringing and that exposure to nature actually inspired or influenced your future work?
I'm sure that's what it's all about. I grew up with it, loved it, started buying bird books when I was about 10 or 11 or something, and my family encouraged the interest as well. And I just loved it so much I had to draw it, you know.
They didn't just encourage the interest. I was surprised to learn in the book that your parents let you dedicate an entire room of the house to some sort of a museum.
Ah, yes, I had my little museum where I used to, because I did taxidermy as a boy, and I used to skin and mount animals that died in a small private zoo, and I used to keep live snakes, yes.
Yeah? What type of snakes?
Well, one got out. A nasty brown snake got out one day when I wasn't there. And when I got home, my mother said, that brown snake has to go. She wouldn't have it in the house anymore.
Understandable, too. How did you get into taxidermy?
As a kid, I was at this small zoo. My parents had taken me there, and I was wandering. It was a little private zoo on the edge of Lake Macquarie, Carey Bay Zoo, and an old Scotsman owned the place, and he was a lovely old man. And there was a shed or some sort of building that I could peer through the window, and I saw some birds, mounted birds in there, and I thought, well, and this interested me greatly. And my father went and talked to the owner, talked to old Tom Brown, and he took me under his wing. He said he would teach me, and so during the week I'd be at school, and the weekends I'd get on the train and go out to Toronto and then walk the last 3 miles round to the zoo, and I'd stay there for the weekend, learning. And it was a great introduction to see lots of different animals and birds, as well as learn to do taxidermy.
Set you up well for your later career.
Yes, well, if you're going to paint birds, it's a great help if you know what the inside of the bird is, where the bones are and what they do and how it functions.
Why is that?
Well, you know how it's connected, and when you draw it, you know you're not putting the leg in the wrong place, and because a bird's got all those feathers covering up the shape of the body, But under those feathers there is a shape and a body, and it does make itself evident on the outside of the bird if you're drawing it properly.
Penny Elson, last time we chatted with you, it was when you released Cayley and Son, the life and art of Neville Henry Cayley and Neville William Cayley. So clearly a love of birds. Why did you choose to write this about Bill?
Well, in some ways he's the next obvious one after the Cayleys, isn't he? You could almost say he's their successor. But Andrew Isles, the natural history bookseller, actually encouraged Bill to have his biography done, and Bill chased me for a while. I was a bit reluctant at first, never having written biography at that stage, but I'm very glad I've done it because it was just a remarkable story and a great gift for an author to be able to do something like this, especially an author like me who loves illustrated books.
That detail that Bill was just describing there, understanding the bones and the structure of the birds and allowing that to inform his artwork, it's that detail that really sets him apart, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, it is. I mean, but yeah, I mean, he's obviously got the technique and the artistry, but he's more accurate than just about anyone else. And that's his deep knowledge of birds, going back to when he was a kid and watching them in the bush, and then dissecting them and seeing how the bones and the muscles and all that fit together, and how the feathers attach, and it really sets him apart, that deep knowledge.
Bill, you've worked in a time when there's been photography that has taken over from traditional illustrations of birds to a large extent. How important has it been to really get that finer detail as exact as possible?
Well, it's very important to have it correct, because somebody that knows their birds intimately will certainly find an error if you've got one. And so it's important to have it right. What was the thrust of the first part of that question?
The fact that you've worked as an artist and an illustrator at a time when photography is almost taken over from that traditional role of what you do.
Well, yes, I suppose it has to a great degree, and this digital photography is wonderful. There's some wonderful pictures being taken. But if you're doing a family of birds, for instance, if you're painting all the rails of the world or whatever, there's not going to be photographs of every rail, and if there is, there certainly mightn't show what you want to show, whereas an artist has the ability to paint a bird and make sure he shows the parts that you need to see. It's not just, that's when you're doing scientific illustration. It's important that the bird is identifiable by all its markings and feathers and such.
You seem to go a step further than just the bird, though. The detail, the landscape that it's set in, and what it might be eating is all there in such detail as well.
Well, yes. I particularly in my later work, I always did put a background behind it, but then I got very serious about backgrounds and study very carefully the plant that they're eating or fish or whatever it is. We've gone to great pains in certain instances to get the exact species of animal. I just did one of some hornbills from Southeast Asia, and it was commissioned by a man in Switzerland, and he said he had seen them taking cicadas from under the limbs, these particular species of hornbill. And so when I illustrated it, I thought, now where am I going to find this cicada? And I found the world cicada expert lived not that far from where I am. He's at Kuranda. And I said, do you have a Philippines island hornbill from cicada, I'm sorry. Do you have a cicada from Miyako ensis? No, not Miyako ensis. Anyhow, the Philippine island that this bird came from. And he did have, and so I was able to use the exact species that's endemic to that island.
Yeah.
Behind the bird. And that adds a story. It fills a story in.
Bill, there's so much to talk about in this book. It covers your life from growing up to your travels around the world. One of the areas that really stands out to me, one of the chapters, is dedicated to your time in Papua New Guinea. Some of the photos from the 1970s are quite incredible. Tell me about what attracted you to PNG.
Well, before I ever went there, I had Colin Simpson's books on the people of New Guinea, like Adam with Arrows and Adam in Plumes. Colin Simpson wrote these books. And I had applied, actually, to become a KIUP, a patrol officer in New Guinea. And I was refused because my education wasn't high enough. Even though I said, well, you give me the exam and I'll sit it and I'll pass it for you. And they just wouldn't let me sit the exam. Mm-hmm. As it happens, it was probably a good thing I didn't become a patrol officer. So we went there in 1970 with Joe Forshaw, who's the author who I've worked with for 40 years. We've worked together. And once I had seen a little bit of New Guinea, I said, this is it for me. I've got to come back here. I went back about 4 times. One extended expedition.
And what were you looking for? What was it that attracted you?
Oh, birds of paradise that time. Because when I was there in 1970, we were looking for parrots, because Joe was doing the parrots of the world at the time, and we were looking at New Guinea parrots. But while I was there, I did see my first bird of paradise in the wild, and I said, that's it, and I've got to come back and do the birds of paradise, which I did.
They're famous for their dance. Was this one dancing when you saw it?
Yes, I did eventually see them dancing. The first sighting was just one flashing across in front of me, like a fireball it was. It was beautiful.
Incredible, and it got you from that moment, clearly.
From that moment, yeah, I knew I had to paint Birds of Paradise. And after Birds of Paradise, it's because it's gone on to other family groups, and Joe seeks out all the specimens, and he fills me in on a lot of the details of the animal, its life and so forth, which I can then, when I know how it lives, I can work it into the paintings.
So even for someone who's studied birds, watched so closely birds right around the world, there's something about the birds of paradise that really got you, is there?
Oh, well, they are outstanding. They're just such spectacular animals, and they're beautiful. That's about all I can say.
I know David Attenborough has had a similar experience. He says it was Birds of Paradise that lured him into wildlife. Now, David writes the foreword in this book. What's your relationship with David Attenborough?
It's very good. It's I've known him for quite a few years, and he originally sought me out to get me to paint him a painting of Birds of Paradise, so that's how we come to know each other. And since then we've seen him on quite a few occasions, and he's come and stayed with us, and he made a film on my work.
Well, he says you're the best painter of birds alive in the world today. Quite high praise.
Well, that's one man's opinion. It's not mine.
But it's not exactly the man in the street, is it?
No, well, let's say he likes them.
So, Penny, do you think Bill's work is widely known in Australia, that it's appreciated that we have this person of international significance in this field that's just, sitting amongst the rainforest in Queensland?
Well, I think he's widely known amongst the ornithological community, but certainly not as widely known as he should be beyond that. Attenborough's right. Attenborough's not the only one who thinks he's the best. So.
Yeah, I know Bill has been recognised internationally on many occasions. I noticed throughout this book, it's not just about birds, though. That's what really stood out to me. I've been familiar with Bill's work around birds for quite some time, but you've included many other illustrations and paintings as well. I take it that was deliberate, Penny? You were trying to broaden the appreciation of Bill's work?
Indeed, I made a special effort to show how versatile he is, that he's not just the best bird painter in the world, but he does landscapes, mammals, insects, shells, you name it. And there's some wonderful early paintings that his aunt and uncle encouraged him to keep, that from when he was just a kid, drawing birds when he was just a kid. I think there's a quail and a pheasant, and I think they just they enrich his story, which is a very rich story in any case.
Bill, do you have any particular favourite subjects or pieces that are in this book?
Yes and no. I'm always asked what's my favourite bird, and I always say it's the one I'm working on at the time. And when you're doing a painting, if it's a landscape, that is what appeals to me most at that time. You get absorbed into it, and so it goes. And I've been lucky to be able to pick and choose my subjects over the years, so that I'm not very often do I have to paint something I don't like or didn't want to paint. Mostly I'm painting things that I'm very interested in. And if I wasn't interested in it before I had to paint it, by the time I've researched it, I've become interested in it.
It gets you, yeah. There's a picture in this book of a bird enthusiast, Chris, who's got a big tattoo on one arm based on one of your illustrations. What do you make of the tattoo, Bill?
I know where it comes from. It's one of the ones that was done in a portfolio of parrots of the cockatoos of the world, and he's taken that out and had it put on his arm. He's nobody I know. He happens to be a friend of a friend who told us about this tattoo on his arm, and Penny thought it was a good idea to show it.
Are you happy with the tattooist's work?
Oh, it looks fine. I think I wouldn't be happy if it was on my arm.
But it's quite an accurate depiction, though.
Oh, I think it's pretty fairly done. Yes.
Yeah.
looks. I can recognise it anyhow.
All right. Look, if people are interested, the book is out now. It's The Life and Art of William T. Cooper: An Eye for Nature. It's by Penny Olsen, and the foreword is by David Attenborough. Penny and Bill, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been great chatting with you.
Thanks, Cameron.
Thank you, Cameron. Lovely.
Penny Olsen and Bill Cooper. You're listening to Bush Telegraph. Cameron Wilson with you on RN and Radio Australia.